So controller and scope is a glue between the controller and the view. So we've already talked about what scope is. It's just basically this JavaScript object with some hooks baked into it. The controller is responsible for constructing the model on scope. So what it does is it actually sets the initial properties on scope. So for instance, when you saw controller, I injected scope and I said scope.world equals whatever. I was constructing basically the model initially, as well as if I would have had scope.getWorld and then I actually did something. So it's basically properties and methods. That's what the controller does. It's kind of the foundation that scope is on. And then scope provides commands, and for the view to act upon, that would be a method on scope that you're actually calling from the view. Scope also provides context. So you saw the curly braces and I had world. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything in a vacuum. But in the context of the controller, we know exactly what that means because it means world on scope. So that's really important to understand as you start to build out Angular applications with like repeaters and everything, since you don't have to worry about context. Because for instance, if you're repeating over a list of items and you get these, so for every item you're getting a new scope. Well, the neat thing about repeaters is every one of those items keeps track of its own scope object. And so they're not bleeding on each other. It's very good about knowing what specifically you're talking about. So it's very good at keeping track of context. And so you have your controller, which is your imperative JavaScript behavior. Scope, which is your glue. And then you have your view, which is your declarative kind of markup. So here's some best practices about controllers, because I think this is a really easy way when you get into Angular to kind of make some architectural decisions that will paint you in a corner. Is one, controllers should not know anything about the view they control. It's very easy coming from a jQuery background to make this mistake. Controllers are simply data structures and methods. If you need to do DOM manipulation, that goes in a directive. They should be small and focused. That controllers should only care about the view that they control. Doing that makes it very easy to test them. When I was doing Flex, we had basically these controllers that got super bloated because they were controlling like all this stuff. We basically broke those out into view models where we now have these small, testable, manageable pieces of code. And so you really want to keep your controllers small and focused. They should not talk to other controllers. If you need to share information between controllers, you use a service. And that's where you are abstracting. Because if you are seeing like this controller needs this information and this controller needs the same information, that's a candidate to pull that into kind of a higher level domain model. And then you'll essentially use root scope as like an event bus to talk between the two. And kind of the most important thing is they should not own the domain model. In other words, a controller should not have information or data that the rest of the application is going to need. And so that's how you start to isolate things into like a single source of truth. And so even a lot of times if I do something and I need to share it, I'll actually propagate that change up to the service and then pull it back down. But it's not letting your controllers own the domain model. Move those to the services.